what SRM does depends on our assumptions about what technology is used and how it's deployed. There's no question that there are ways these underlying methods could be used that are very destructive. So there's not a value-free or politics-free answer about what it does. They depend on politics. But I can say the following. If you assume you're using stratospheric aerosols, if you're aiming to cool the world maybe 0.5 degree, so a supplement to a world that otherwise would have been at a little over 2, brings it a little under 2, for example. And if you assume the goal is to be roughly uniform, say balancing the northern and southern hemispheres, all of which I think are reasonable goals, goals where there's actually a strong political force why they might be chosen. If that's true, then when you look at climate model results, they in fact show that these technologies would reduce really most climate risks we know about almost everywhere, and that the risks of the methods would be small. But maybe that's wrong. And what is certainly true is the community, the larger technical community, doesn't believe that result. So I think what you see is a big gap between what there's now been 10 years of, most major climate models looking at this, 1,000 papers published. And despite statements that I and many others make at the beginning of talks like this saying SRM is very risky, the actual evidence that we see from the models doesn't show that. It shows that the risks are quite small, but I'd say that is not a result that is trusted. And the answer to your question about how it might change in the political willingness to deal with this is really all about trust in who's doing the research and in how it's assessed, not in the actual research. So I would say that I don't expect much change in the actual scientific knowledge in, say, by 2030. We've had 10 or 15 years of work. This isn't, while it's a new technology, it's not really. It's been talked about for 30, 40 years, and it builds on existing knowledge. So I don't expect much change. I think the real question is how to interpret it. Let me end with 2 things. One is, we keep talking about risk to risk, but we often don't do the comparisons. Let me give you one. There's now been several papers, I helped to be an author of one of them, that have looked at the direct impacts on human health, mortality, from deployment of stratospheric aerosols, impacts through depletion of the ozone layer and air pollution. They suggest that cooling the world 1 degree C would reduce, would kill something like 10,000 people a year, additional mortality of 10,000 a year. It sounds like a big number, but the same models using health impacts of extreme temperatures suggest that doing that would reduce mortality from heat by more than 1 million a year. So ratios of more than 100 to 1 of benefit to risk. And I think it's really worth thinking that through. Last point, I agree with what Massa said about the IPCC taking CDR very seriously and not SRM. I'm not sure that that's based on science and technological or environmental judgment. I think it's based on prejudice. My personal view, even as somebody who stands to profit from CDR, is that if you're honest about analyzing the risks, SRM offers less risks mid-century for cooling than CDR.